If you're using AI coding tools like Cursor, you've certainly found yourself in a scenario where you're trying to get a new feature to work or trying to get something debugged, and ultimately you just find yourself going in circles with the AI model. You're pulling your hair out, you're getting frustrated, you're burning tokens, and it's costing you money, and ultimately nothing is getting solved. It is a very, very frustrating and painful spot to be in. I have been there myself. And well, now I'm going to share with you 3 prompts that I have put together to get myself unstuck. And ultimately, now that I use all the time before I embark on building a new feature or getting a new feature working or debugging. So if you're in this scenario where you're stuck right now, it's going to help you. And I know that once you learn it, you're going to use these prompts methodically going forward to keep yourself out of these scenarios. So let's jump into it here with the first prompt, and that is review this code base and create concise documentation that a developer could use to quickly get up to speed before jumping into work. Save as an MD file. An MD file is a markdown file, which is just a very light text file that's formatted. And I'll show you what it looks like here. This is from a project that I was working on recently. Here it is. This is the exact documentation file that it created in markdown format. And what this does is this gives you a central point of reference for you to provide the AI model so that it doesn't have to go out and scour together everything every time you open up a new chat. And you can also have another AI model check the file so that you're sure it's accurate, because if you have to rely on an AI model to kind of go out and do the research on everything itself every time you open up a new chat, or maybe not even every time you open up a new chat, as the chats get longer, you're opening yourself up to inaccuracies that the AI model has. So I might ask GPT 5.1 Codex to create this file, and then I might ask Sonnet 4.5 or another model just to review it and confirm its accuracy. And you'll find that when you do that, oftentimes the first model did not have something entirely accurate or had something incorrect. And just what you see there really highlights the discrepancy that can arise when you send a AI model kind of just off into the ocean of solving an issue. So getting the documentation and having the documentation for whatever you're working on, whether it's a code base, a specific part of the code base, like this would be for a WordPress plugin, for a web app, whatever it is, just having this documentation so the AI can just quickly go through, a couple hundred lines here, as opposed to the whole code base and burning up context and leaving room for hallucination. You're setting yourself up for success by creating a foundation here. I think what you'll find is that even as you go through a chat and you've provided the documentation at the beginning, it helps to provide the documentation later in the chat as well, even if you're not all the way through the entire context window of that chat. So that way it doesn't have to go back and reanalyze the chat, because when you send a message through in Cursor or any of these models, basically what it does is it sends all of the prior chat history. And I'm trying to open up Cursor. There it is. I'm looking at my other window, and the one I want is right here on my screen. But when you send a model or you send a message through, it sends all of the prior chat history with it, right? So as that gets longer, it gets harder for the AI to be focused. This documentation keeps it very, very, very focused. So create this documentation, have another AI model, check it. Okay. Next prompt. Please review this issue and identify the specific issue and solution. Create a debug log so we can keep track of attempts to make this work. Include the initial issue, your analysis and solution. Format so that we can keep adding attempts onto it if it fails. And I would also send the documentation with this message here. And the goal, or not really the goal, but what we're asking it to do is create this log so that there is a traceable history of what has been done. Right? That way you can feed that back to the AI model or feed that into your chat, and it can see exactly what has been done as opposed to letting it go in loops. Because let's just say that you go in and you say, identify the issue and fix this, and that doesn't work. You say, that doesn't work, identify, the issue and fix this. That doesn't work, identify the issue and fix this. By the time you get 3 or 4 of those deep, it'll go back and start trying to fix what it already fixed or what it proposed. It'll identify an issue as something that it already proposed to fix. And that'll happen relatively quickly. If you have the log and you can provide that, you will largely avoid that. And if the AI model gets to a point where it's hallucinating, close it, put the chat into a new log, and start from there. So where the only context it has is that log. And I think that you'll find incredible success doing that. I personally have found a lot of success doing that because, as I've explained, the AI will just start looping through and doing stuff that it's already done until you've got the documentation in the log telling it what it has already done to prevent that from happening, okay? And finally, could you create/add some debug code so you will get actual insight from my tests? And this is really applicable when you are testing on a server that is not your local environment. So for example, I might be doing something on my local computer, and then I deploy it on the server, and now it's not working as I expected. Well, what this prompt is asking it to do is create a code that will spit out some debug code, or debug log, I should say here, that it can look at and ultimately use it to help identify the issue. So it depends on what I'm working on, right? But maybe if I come back and I'm running through this process of asking it to identify the specific issue and solution and adding to it, and it's gone twice or 3 times and we don't have it yet, I might start considering asking it to create some debug code so that it's spitting something out that it can actually use. If my issue is already off of my local server and on a web server somewhere, I will start right from the beginning and having it do this. That way it's getting the actual data, the actual sequence of the code, all of that stuff, etc. Yeah, so that is my process for getting unstuck and, well, avoiding getting stuck altogether, right? It's real simple here, and when you think about it, we're just creating documentation so we have a foundation so the AI model knows what we're working with and knows everything without having to kind of go out there into a black hole every time you send it a message and figure out what's going on. Then we're asking it to create a log so we can have a traceable record of what has been done and what failed, and if necessary, create code so it has actual data from what's happening as the code is running or being used by a user on the website. On that note, guys, I've got something else to share with you here, and that is my process for building out entirely new apps or features. But before I do that, and we get into that, if you're watching so far and you found it helpful or insightful, let me know in the comments below and smash that like button to help me out in the YouTube algorithm. Now, let's go up here to this first slide or prompt that I would use if I'm planning out a new app or major feature, okay? Starting from the very beginning. Here's what I want to build, explain it, and then say, create a PRD that will serve as a guide for professional development. To flesh it out, ask me any questions you need with multiple choice responses that I can select from. All right, and the PRD is a product requirements document. And there's going to be a lot of detail in a PRD. It's going to include, all of the features that need to be included, all of the user stories for how a user would use it. And there's going to be a lot of detail. And that leads me to the second part of this here that we need to talk about, and that is to flesh it out. Ask me any questions you need with multiple choice responses that I can select from. If you don't do this, it's just going to ask you a bunch of questions usually, or it's going to make the PRD and not ask you anything, one or the other. But if it asks you a bunch of questions, you have to type out a lot. Well, here, by asking it for multiple choice, all you have to do, reply with your options or what you want your response to be, and it'll give you some options that are good, and then that'll help guide it to create the PRD. Then after that, follow up with, considering this PRD, list out the phases in order I should work to build this out using an AI model like GPT 5.1 Codex. Keep them concise with a short description, add it to the PRD. These phases are, well, as it already implies here, how you should work to build it out. But what I would do in that case is for each phase, I would give the chat the PRD and say, plan out building, X phase from the PRD, set this into plan mode here, and let it come up with its own plan to build out that phase of the project. And that keeps you moving through very fast, and that really prevents a lot of things like things that you overlook, right? You might build a web app that needs to process payments for whatever, because every web app needs to process payments, right? And you get into it and you're like, okay, this is cool. And then you go to test out the payment functionality and you realize it's an absolute shit show. Nothing works, right? Well, when you're following this type of method, it's going to include building out that payment functionality as one of the phases. All right. So that's a little bonus. I hope that sheds a lot of light into, well, our initial topic here on getting the AI on track and issues solved when you're in those frustrating downward spiraling loops of AI coding. And also planning out a new app or a major feature. If you did, you know the drill. Smash that like button to help me out in the YouTube algorithm. I'm calling it a wrap and signing off on that note.